Live from Utah's Wasatch Front, the pulse of the Mountain West, where the issues that shape your life meet the truth that sets you free. Across Utah, across the Republic, and around the world, welcome. I'm Trent Christensen, and this is KMMU. KMMU and Main Street Media stream live wherever you enjoy your streaming. We broadcast live on YouTube, Rumble, X, and on our website, kmmu.org. Now please join our host, John Twitchell. This is Let's Talk Utah's Talk with John.
Forward to being with you here. Hello, folks. This is Talk with John. Look forward to being here with you for the next 2 hours. I'm going to be introducing my first guest here momentarily. I'm really grateful to have my guest with me, and I think, folks, you're really going to enjoy this as well. But before we get rolling, I want to get our show off to a proper start, as it were. Want to introduce you guys, those of you that may be new, because we have new people joining us all the time. I like to open each show with the show prayer. Now, it's not actually, don't say a prayer, but it's the prayer of my heart when it comes to doing the show. And then the show mantra, the thought process behind this show. So let's get to that right now, folks. First show prayer is, I hope my show is a gift back to my forefathers, the founding fathers, and may it be an acceptable token to our Father above. Then the show mantra, where there is liberty, there is the Spirit of Christ. Where the Spirit of Christ is, there will be liberty. And the greater the Spirit of Christ, the greater liberty will be. And today, now, I have joining me Tina Cannon. And let me bring her in. Tina, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate you being here. And appreciate you being with us today. Now, for those of you that don't know Tina has been kind of a watchdog. I hope you don't mind me using that term, Tina. But you've been kind of a watchdog for several years here in the state of Utah. And now she happens to be the state of Utah's auditor, or Utah State Auditor. I'm not exactly sure what the official term is.
That was it.
But I believe it's Utah State Auditor, if I remember correctly. Yes. And please forgive me if I got that wrong.
You got that right. I am the Utah State Auditor, and it has long been the mantra of the office that we are a watchdog for Utah taxpayers. So we hold government accountable, or at least we help the taxpayer hold government accountable, because we don't have the power, the independence of the office. We don't have the power to force anyone to do what we say. We just inform the public. So making sure that the public is aware of everything that we're aware of is the main goal of the office, and to let the public hold government accountable through our actions and our work in the office. So appreciate you allowing me to be here today, John, and to talk about the things that we do in the office. I find it important, so I'm hoping everybody else does as well.
Well, it is absolutely my pleasure to have you here. I was extremely pleased that you wound up becoming our state auditor. I will raise my hand and say that I voted for you.
Thank you.
And glad to have you here on the show. And one thing that I appreciate is that I asked you when you were running for office, if you were elected, if you'd be willing to come and talk to our audience. And I think it's very important for the public officials to do two things. One, keep commitments that they've made. And two, to actually be in front of the public. So thank you for being willing to join Talk with John.
I appreciate the time. Anytime. Happy to talk about all the things that we do. So.
Okay, so I hit you with a number of topics, but I say let's get what you talked to me about when you first came in. before we went live, you shared with me, and you told me, and this is another thing that I appreciate about Tina, folks. She is not at her office. She's not here in the state of Utah. She's actually out at a convention for state auditors, and she is in her hotel room, I
Yep.
believe, joining us. She made time for us when during a very busy time for her. She is taking time out of her busy schedule when she's back there, supposed to be whining and dining with the big people, right? She decided to join lowly John. And so hopefully, I know well, I don't know that she likes wine. So that maybe
Yeah.
that's maybe.
Well, I don't
But
ever drink, but there's parts of this job that do make it more and more enticing all the time. So, but I have not yet given into that. But I am in the beautiful Lansing, Michigan. I have never actually been to Lansing, Michigan before, but this is a convention of elected and appointed state auditors from across the country. There were 30 of us today in that principals meeting discussing the emerging issues for audit across the United States right now. And as I was sharing with John, part of that pushback that comes from being an independent auditor is threats to that independence and the outside influence that wants to come in and influence the results of audits. And sometimes legislators do that through your budget. Sometimes governors do that through like we did see over pushing to appoint instead of have an independently elected official. And sometimes we see that through legislation in changing the audit requirements or how the office is funded or what they can actually look at. So you see all sorts of different directions that impact how an auditor can give a clean opinion or what they're allowed to work on or work with in order to do their work. So it's just when I'm starting to think it's a unique aspect of Utah politics, then I come to an organization like this and really see that it's happening across the country, that anytime that's the nature of politics, someone wants to always put a hand on the scale, it seems. So,
well, let me put it this way. I could be doing something that's not even nefarious, and I would want to control what comes out of the auditing office. If I was an elected official, if I was running, even if I wasn't an elected official, let's say that like I was some clerk in some town or county, I wouldn't want a auditor, anybody hears the word audit. I don't know if anyone that's like, good job, I get to do an audit, I don't know that anybody feels that way.
No, and that's we joke all the time that this is the least liked office. I am the most hated person in Utah at any one given time, depending on who you are. And that's really true of some of the audit results that we have. We were talking earlier, I've got several that are coming out next week and several reports we're doing for the legislative interim session next week. And some of those, we're not going to make anyone happy because that's not our job. Our job is to tell you what's happening, why it's happening, whether or not that's compliant with the law, and make recommendations for how to improve that process if need be. And then there are always the times, which seem kind of rare this week, where things are going really well and smooth, and that clean audit is also a signal of government working well. And we do see that the majority of the audits that are released from our office, especially on the financial side, show that there is a clean reporting according to standards. But those audits don't get the attention as the ones that have problems in them. So that's just the nature of society. If it bleeds, it leads, I guess is the way.
That's right. Hey, I talk about the stuff that's bleeding. So let's not poo-poo that too much. Okay. Let me ask you this, Tina. Okay. You said something just a moment ago that I think is important for people to know. So when people hear state auditor, they probably think, hey, all you do is audit the money. Is there anything else that is, so let's go, what does a state auditor do other than like make everybody quake in their boots when they hear they're getting a call from you?
Well, most people think of us as auditing their tax returns, and that's not what we do at all. That we audit only government and only government functions. And there are 5 ways that we do that through my office. We have financial audit, which is the biggest part of my office, where we review the financial transactions of the state of Utah and all of the subsidiary governments of the state of Utah. And then we also oversee local government. So through financial audit, we do the financial audit for the state of Utah and all the subsidiaries. That's all the universities. That's all of the government agencies across the state for state government. And then we have our local government oversight, which is all of the local governments. So that's about 1,700 different local governments down to special service districts that we review. We review all of their financial audits. We don't do that work, but we are the auditor of last resort. So we review and train all of the local CPA firms that do those audits. So that's the main thing of what we do. But we also are the hotline. So if you see government waste, fraud, abuse across the state, that's auditor.utah.gov for the hotline. And we still to this day, the most often way that fraud is found is through a whistleblower or someone who sees something and says something about it. And that reporting happens. So we do investigations, and we have 4 full-time people, and we are constantly busy in investigations. So the biggest, that is, people think that Utah is pretty clean, but not so much. So we have more than enough work to do through those investigations. And then we also are the state privacy auditor is also in my office. So we are now charged as of May of this year in keeping the data privacy for all Utahns in line through all of those government agencies. So we are now.
So what does that mean? What does that mean that you're over the
data
state privacy?
So that means that if you have a concern about government over collecting or oversharing personal data, those reports come to our office and we investigate those as well. So we have the state privacy auditor and her staff that is under my purview as the state auditor. And so we have started into those audits and are currently looking into one oversharing of children's data and keeping all of the things that government knows about you that shouldn't be shared or shouldn't be available for other people to be able to see. All of those items are also under our purview. And then I know I'm missing one. Oh, data analytics. The most important one right now is Transparent Utah. So I talked about all of that oversight. We have all of the financial reports and all of the checkbooks for all of those entities, all 1,800 government agencies across the state. That is a lot of data. So transparent.utah.gov takes all of that data and organizes it in a way that it helps the public hold government accountable. So if you go to transparent.utah.gov, we have updated a bunch of the dashboards, and we make that available and searchable for the regular Joe curious about how things are going in their government. So you can see who they pay, what they pay, how often they pay them. You can see what the salaries of every government official across the state are. You can break that data down in a myriad of different ways. There are 29 different ways to search that data. We are releasing several more as the year continues. So if you have an idea of how you would like to see us make that data easier to understand, easier to search, or to be able to see in a nutshell what's going on, we are open and welcome your suggestions on how to do that. So we try but we are deep in the weeds, and sometimes we miss the most obvious part. So we would welcome people to go out and look at Transparent Utah and then come back and make suggestions over what would make it more usable for the public. Because like we said at the beginning, our job is to make government accountable to the public. And the more information we give the public about how government is functioning and how they're spending your money, the easier it is for the public to hold government accountable. And then hopefully when you are voting, you are taking that information that we've provided you and making intelligent decisions over who or what you vote for, regardless of what it is across the state.
Okay. Other than financial records, are you responsible for, and you could say the privacy records of just what government has collected? Is there any other responsibilities? Are you over voting information and stuff like that?
So if it is financial, we have purview over it. If it's compliance with state law, we also have jurisdiction over that. So we do investigative authority over whether or not money is being used according to statute and according to law. So we make sure that a government is also complying. Government accounting is interesting in that there are restricted uses for funds that this money can only be used for this purpose that the legislature has created for this pile of money. So we make sure that governments stick to those rules. Sometimes that's harder than people think to get that, because they see all money as like their personal checkbook, so they can do whatever they want with it. And that's not how government works. So we do compliance audits, and then we also do waste. So a performance audit would be, are you using that money effectively and efficiently? So those are the three different types. There's financial, compliance, and then performance. How are you performing? You asked about being over elections. So next week we are reporting to a legislative committee over 2 different audits that we did on signature gathering. That does bleed into how votes are verified through those same signature processes. So stay tuned for our report next week. On the 18th, we report on that process that we went through. So we have 3 different reports coming out next week over different processes. So I'm leaving you just breathless, waiting for more.
I want to know more.
We actually,
so who looks good? Who looks bad?
well, that's what's interesting about that. So most people know, if you are following the signature verification audit that OLAG is the Office of the Legislative Auditor released theirs. We also went in and reviewed that process at Davis County. But the second review that went through November, most people are not aware of that. We did refer back to the Attorney General. When we find a problem that reaches the level of criminal charges, we refer to the Attorney General's office for those. And we did refer over the evidence that we collected through that second audit, where there was a review of every statewide signature gathering packet. So for every statewide office, and then any that were multi-county as well, we reviewed all of those and contracted out with 15 different CPAs through 2 different firms and organized it and conducted that audit. It was a deep review over that process. So yeah, stay tuned. That's all coming out next week.
Okay, so question on the firms. I'm not necessarily asking who they are, but how do you go about selecting what firms you use versus, are there more firms that want to be part of the process than who you can reach out to? Or do you have a hard time finding firms to help you?
Those are really good questions, and it really depends on the situation. So what we're seeing across Utah is there is a decrease in the amount of CPAs that want to do, and CPA firms that want to do government audit. We are really seeing an aging of the CPA population. And when we're talking about financial audit and auditing to standards, Yellow Book standards, we are required by standards to have a higher level of education and certification in order to do those audits. And we are seeing a decrease in those across the state. So as that happens, because the state auditor's office has to be the auditor of last resort and maintain that independence, we cannot go in and do the financial work for a government organization, we would be relying on industry to be able to go in and do the day-to-day CPA work, and then we become the auditor of last resort. So what that trend is showing me, that our office will have to grow in order to make sure that those audits are done, because if we cannot rely on subcontracting out to the public CPA firms, those audits still have to be done, and that would have to be done through our office, because by the Utah Constitution, we are that final auditor. We cannot go in and do the work. We have to be the auditor. That independence remains crucial. But for the audit that we were talking about in those CPA firms, we did put it out with a request for bid, and we look for independence. So when we choose an audit at a CPA firm, they cannot have a relationship with that government entity. So you can't be an elected official. You can't have a spouse that's an employee or a child who's an employee of that entity. There are some independence issues to make sure that your report isn't biased one way or the other, or that you aren't overlooking something because of a personal relationship with part of that government entity. So if you remember back when I was campaigning, that was the difference between my opponent and I, is I understood that independence issue and said that I would not accept donations or endorsements from anyone over which I had oversight. And when you're talking about 1,800 entities across the state, that's a lot of elected officials. But that is important, that any audit that I would do or any findings that we have through the office are not questioned because of an endorsement or a lack of endorsement or a personal relationship with an elected official. So we try to maintain that even when we subcontract those audits out.
Well, folks, real quickly, I'm going to take a breath here and mention, folks, that you are listening and watching us on KMMU, Main Street Media, Utah. We are live on Rumble, X, YouTube, and our website, kmmu.org. You can give us a call. You can ask Tina a question. We don't get many questions from the audience, but our lonely call screener is looking forward to your calls that you might be able to ask Tina a question. So the phone number for Tina is 385 to talk to Tina, and our lonely call screener, Dwayne, is 385-899-2134. That's 385-899-2134. All right, let's get back to it. So if I'm understanding correctly, you've got two difficulties when it comes to state auditors. And I actually want to come back to the government hotline. I have a follow-up question on that as well. So first, CPAs are becoming harder to find because there's a fewer percentage of them, if I understand correctly. And then secondly, it's more difficult for you because there are entangling alliances that they may have, or possible seen as it could be so like, for instance, a CPA that I would totally trust in general for you to go to is Phil Lyman. You couldn't go to Phil Lyman for a number of different things, right? Because he ran over his own county. Maybe you could go to him for Weber County, but you definitely couldn't go for down in San Juan or Moab or something along those lines. And then anything that might have to do over the governor's office, that you probably couldn't use him in that situation. Maybe even now that he's out of the state legislature, I don't know how long that you might have to stay away from him, but that becomes difficult, is finding those individuals.
That's true. So, and the CPA population is aging. So this is, I don't know why. I love accounting. I love financial accounting, but the younger generation, not so much. So the average age is getting to be upper 50s, mid 60s. So the younger generation just isn't going in. And by national standards, for audit, they're yellow book standards, and you have to have 80 hours of continuing education based on those standards.
What is a yellow book standard for those people like talk with John that's kind of ignorant to that
Well,
stuff?
that's the color of the book back in the day when it was an actual book, but they're government accounting standards. So that really spell out what that independence means, what it looks like, and then the methods that you go through and how you determine evidence and how you determine materiality and how you determine all of the technical aspects of how you would do an audit are governed by standards, and they're national standards, so that if you do an audit in Virginia over federal funding, or if you do an audit in Utah with federal funding, you're using the same standards. Your comparisons and your methods are the same. So those are national standards. It's just like the generally accepted accounting principle, only these are audit standards. So the yellow book is audit standards for how you would collect evidence, all of the technical details about how we do our job. So to make sure that we maintain fairness, independence, and that the person who's being audited can then trust that you are not just going in with a hidden agenda and trying to make them look bad. So there's standards that we hold us both sides of the audit responsible for how we conduct our work, and make sure that we're fair through the whole thing. So yeah, as we talked about, if you have a relationship, and that happens all the time in rural Utah, you'll have CPA firms that also have, so you'll have a firm, but you'll have part of their family is part of the government in that area. You cannot do an audit if you have that relationship. So that happens all the time in rural Utah. So we have to go outside of that immediate area and bring an outside firm in to do that work. So, and there are cases.
That makes sense.
Yeah, there are cases like, for example, during that signature audit, that would be a prime example of, if Phil Lyman is bringing the question, you would never want him to actually do the work, because you want to be able to trust that the results were independent, that there wasn't bias on either side. So,
and on the flip side of the coin, you wouldn't want, I'm not saying that Spencer Cox has, or Deidre Henderson has a sibling that happens to be a CPA, but say like that was the case, or a cousin, they couldn't be, and say like that's one of the best CPAs, right, is related to them somehow or has business connections, you couldn't use them as well. So I can see that how that's a little bit of a challenge.
So in our office, we're one of the few, we swear each one of our employees in, because of the work that we do and the magnitude of the work that we do. There are two things that happen with anyone that I hire in the office. One, there is a confidentiality agreement that they agree to, because we are looking at sensitive data and it can be classified data, that they don't share any of that information. And there are rules that govern any investigations, especially in fraud. And then the other thing is we swear everyone in so that they understand the importance of what they're doing, that we represent, not me as the state auditor, that everyone in my office represents the people. I'm independently elected, and who audits me, that's the people. I answer directly to the people of Utah, and so do the employees in my office. So everyone takes the same oath of office that I take. They are appointed by the state auditor, and they are at-will employees. So if there ever gets to be a problem with that independence, there is no question that we either move them to a different section of the office, or we let them go. And that can create a problem if someone in the office wants to run for a position in an office in government. We have to go through a different set of requirements. So I would say that independence doesn't last forever. So if Phil wants to apply for the office, and after he's been out of the legislature, I think the timeline is typically 5 years, then he can join the office and audit all the fun things. So, or
he loves that. He says he loves that type of stuff. That'll put me to sleep. So
it is not for everyone. It is not. And we find that in the office too, that people need to rotate through. And while I guess you would call it the sexy stuff of the office, are really the fraud audits. And you really do feel like you make a difference, because it is amazing to me how many times the investigation starts with, oh, there's nothing going on. We trust them completely. And then like the one we just did, it's hundreds of thousands that were stolen by someone we just trusted. So it gets a little discouraging.
And that report is coming out in a week. Is that
so?
What
that one is going to take us a little longer because it's larger. But if you were following the Department of Alcoholic Beverages that we released about a month ago, that was about $120,000 that an employee was able to steal from just one particular, what do they call it? I don't imbibe, so I just went blank on the alcohol stores, the state liquor store.
stores.
That's it. Yeah, just
I visit him daily, if not hourly.
so.
If any of my church officials are watching, I go to them hourly.
Yeah, and that one was really interesting because most people want to go to sleep over the basics of what we do, but for 3 years in a row, we said you're not reconciling your bank statements. That's a major problem. And then when they turned over the fraud, they're like, "Well, we found it," and I'm like, "We've told you for 3 years to reconcile your bank statements. What do you think we were telling you for? That's a basic." So things like that sometimes government just can't get out of its own way. It is those basic things that are basic financial checks and balances to the system and making sure that there are proper oversights that sometimes just get overlooked. And in an agency the size of Department of Alcoholic Beverage Services, it can get out of hand really, really quickly. So,
okay, I want to ask you about the government hotline. What percentage, the government hotline, what percentage of the time does somebody say, "Hey, I think something suspicious is going on"? What percent is it? Like half of them wind up being true, 20% wind up being true, 80% wind up being true? What are the percentages typically on those tip lines?
so it depends on what you consider true. So if you're talking about it being a major amount of money, those are less common. But still true. So still there. Non-compliance happens quite a bit. The biggest problem that we see across Utah right now is what I would call legal, but not ethical. And that's a struggle for us constantly in the office. So I would say that the vast majority of the reports that we get through the hotline turn out to be legal, but not ethical use. And the only way to combat that use, and I'm going to give the example of, because it's just easier, is if you were following the reports that were coming out about the Utah State president of Utah State and the use of her budget. Everything she spent was within her budget. She did not go over budget. But the question then becomes, does she really need 4 cars? And that's up to the public and her oversight board to decide, is that a ethical use of her money? But our office, in our review, yep, that's within her budget. But the oversight for how she used that money really comes down to that local board, and that it's actually the Board of Regents at the university. You have review authority. You decide if she's using it well or not, or there needs to be a rolling back of what is allowed use for public funds. And that happens quite often, especially.
So was it 4 cars that were her personal cars? Yes. Or 4? Well, it is Utah State, so if she has like a monster truck, that might be good getting it around. And you've got to have a Ferrari so you can get, because it is Logan, Utah. You need to get down south real quick, yeah. Right? You need to get down to. So.
And I think one of the things that they found, and that happens quite a bit, even through. And I would never downplay the importance of, and what worries me all the time is the press and the press role in that, because they were able to dig through all of those expenditures that you can find on Transparent Utah and then go into the depths over what was all of this for. And then that list over what she was spending it on comes out and is made public. And then the public can decide whether or not that is a proper use. And I think that's really what happened there. Did she need to remodel her office to the extent that she did? Did she need there? One of those 4 was a golf cart to get around campus in, but it was enclosed and heated because it was Logan. And then I think there was an apartment that was rented during the legislative session an Airbnb that was rented for that I have to be at the Capitol and yeah, there are a lot of things in there that I would have found. I'm a Utah State alum, so I found the whole thing just really discouraging over tuition money is going for this. Wow. But there are things like that that happen across the state, and you'll start seeing those over grant money that is given through the state and how that was used. Again, through Utah State. Yeah, there are things when you're talking about the $100 billion that is Utah government across the state, there are lots of opportunities for fraud and abuse, but that legal fits the definition of what you can use it for. The question then becomes, should you? Just because you can does not mean you should. And those are things
Right.
that we can only expose through Transparent Utah in making those transactions available to the public and allowing the public to be able to review those, and then going in during the election cycle and holding elected officials accountable for the decisions they've made through those budgets. We get that pushback all the time. Purchasing policy is another one where we will come out and make a recommendation to entities. You can have a purchasing policy that allows you to have a office or a department head with $125,000 sorry, I'm tired. It's been a long day. It's actually 7:00 my time. So their budget oversight, where they can make up to $125,000 decision without anybody else looking at it. We don't recommend that. That's a lot of money, especially in a small agency. But you can, by state code, you can. We find more and more often that leads to just huge problems over where money was spent, how it was spent, and then it will come back to. And that's one of the things that elected officials just need to be more aware of. If you give an agency or a department head that type of control over their budget and you are not watching how they spend their money, you're the elected official with oversight over their budget. You will be held responsible for what they did with it, not the individual. So that getting people to understand that it is still taxpayer money and that oversight is there for a reason. So I'm starting to sound like Charlie Brown's teacher. I'm boring you now, huh?
No. Okay. So it actually brought up a couple of thoughts.
Okay.
So that's kind of sounds like one of the things that we wanted to talk about was Doge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, kind of, you know, you'd mentioned when we had a phone conversation, I was like, so are you watching what Doge is doing? Are you have any thoughts there? And you're like, yes. So I want to get to that, but also I want to hit this portion real quick. You said you're in Lansing, Michigan. What are you, and one thing that we had talked about is you have maybe not you. I mean, because you're a cannon, for heaven's sakes. I mean, you're not a knife. You're a cannon, right? So I'm sure you don't have these problems, but you have outside sources. You've got the governor's office. Let's do this. Other states might have these issues. They have the legislature trying to influence them, saying, "I have authority over you." So you were sharing with me right before we came on? I just got done with a conversation where other states are having pressure from places within their state. What was that conversation like? And then what similarities are you seeing from other states that are trying to be put in on you? Because the bottom line is you're the new gal, right? You're new. So people are trying to. Now, fortunately, you were in this office, so you saw some things happen beforehand. But I'm sure there are people who are like, she's new. Let's see what we can do to work her over, right?
Well, where you see it most often, because I am independently elected, and it is actually in statute, and I like to remind people because it is there in case they move it. In statute, it says that I determine the appropriate cost and personnel for my office, and that allows that independence to exist. But what you'll see across the country is that there is an influence on that budget. If you don't have staff to do an audit, then you cannot do an audit. So you can say, if you cut the auditor's budget, they are no longer able to do that. And you have actually seen there were situations across the country where legislators were writing legislation limiting what and how an auditor can do their work. And that's a red flag for anyone who's in the industry over, wait, you're telling me I can't look at something that would tell me that I absolutely should look there.
Shouldn't look
And
there.
I see that. I'll have people say, well, we really want you to look at, I'll have legislators say, we really want you to look at this in local government, but we don't want you to look at it in state government. And that,
Yeah, that's not surprising. That surprises me like not at all.
yeah, what is good for the local governments might be good for state government as well, in making sure that those financial controls are there and that you're exercising the same kind of oversight over how the state spends its money. And that's one of the things
Right.
in Utah. John had a real emphasis for education funding and how we fund education. And you can, through Transparent Utah, you can go out on Project Kids and you could see the cost to educate every child in Utah. And we would break it down into administrative cost, instructional costs, lunch costs, so food costs, and transportation costs. But I can't tell you how much it cost to remodel the Capitol, which was one of the biggest projects. So it really depends, and you'll see that in the state auditor's office. There's a change in emphasis from looking at the micro and starting to back up and look at the overall picture of what does it cost to run a state, and what are the costs of the different agencies, and is that in line with other comparables? That's the great thing about being one of 50 states, is we can compare how it's working in all these other states, whether they are Republican or Democrat led, and see, well, what is the average cost? And then we can also start seeing on the efficiencies of that money. Could you have just patterned after something another state had done? Could you not have used that same computer system and brought it into Utah instead of spending $80 million to develop something new? Those types of things become very measurable when you start looking at them. And that's the point, is changing that emphasis from being in the weeds on every single child and starting to look at the bigger projects that are costing the most amount of money across Utah.
Actually,
I'm still going to look at all the little, but we are going to change the emphasis and not spend as much time in the weeds.
okay, so I've got a number of questions that I fired off to you in an email, but you just brought something up. What is the cost per student?
It's right around $11,000 average per student across the state.
How does that, so if you know that off the top of your head, and I'm asking you, and I'm being very unfair because I did not let you know this was coming. What is the construction, cost for construction, like the buildings versus the actual school teacher versus, I am curious kind of how, it'd be interesting to know how that breaks down, because I've gone over this with people before. In fact, I know that I've talked to it with a number of guests, like 10 years ago, 15, probably more like 15 years ago, back when Mike Morley was in the state legislature, and that may not even ring a bell to you, that name. I mean, he's been gone for, that was who Mike McKell replaced, and Jeff Burton replaced Mike McKell, right? So that goes back several years. But back then it was like $7,500 per student. And so I was like, when I just did the math real quick, because somebody was talking about doing something, I'm like, you could build a new school almost every 5 years. You could build almost a new school and still pay for a teacher with that kind of money if you've got like 28 students per classroom.
Well, and that's one of the things that you're starting to see. Now, being an accountant, I will tell you that there are ways that you can manipulate those costs, and over what length of time is that school going to stand, and over what length of time do you say that you are charging those costs, and how much is the actual project? Are you talking about the architect? Are you talking about the site preparation? Are you talking about the actual build? what do you include in those costs? And that's part of the ongoing conversation as we build out this new tool over what do you consider the full cost of this project, and who are the students, and what is the time frame. So one of the challenges that came up during the legislative session is one of the legislators asked why the accounting standard says that we use historical cost and not, so if you're selling a state piece of property and you go in to look at what the cost is, you're looking at just the historical cost, not the market cost. And then if you sell it at the historical cost, you have lost the opportunity for a gain for the taxpayer. Now, it's not very often that the government sells a piece of property, but if you have, through the school trust lands, a piece of property that is designed to gain value over time and be sold to benefit the school, then you should be making sure that you are valuing that project correctly. So your answer is, I don't know yet, because
I
we're
think that
developing this.
property should be sold to John at the historical cost. I mean, because I'm not going to talk
Those
with John.
relationships, again, those relationships and the independence of that sale, and making sure that there is not a favorable situation for the purchaser based on who they are, and making sure there's enough oversight on that sale to make sure that the public whose property this actually is fairly represented in making sure that the proper cost is given to that piece of land. And so that is part of the challenge in making sure. Now, the more of these situations that we're in and the more schools that are built, you have a comparable, and then you can start saying, well, this school in the Canyon School District cost about the same amount as this school in the Box Elder School District. Therefore, that seems to be the reasonable cost of a project. But if this project over here is exponentially higher, then you're going to want to look into, well, what exactly did you put in there? Gold-plated bathroom fixtures? What are we doing here? And I think that's where it gets subjective over what should the cost of a high school be, or an elementary school be. And it isn't until you start looking at those projects in the whole and being able to compare what it is costing, what is reasonable. But there are state projects that are like that too. Instead of just always concentrating on the local entities, those state projects should also have that same type of measurement where you can see, I don't know, what does it cost to pave a mile of road? And why is it we can do it over here for this cost, but over here for this cost? Where are the differences in these projects? And being able to truly measure what those costs are. And stay tuned. This is getting fun. These are the kind of projects that I get really excited and geek out over. Oh my gosh, we're going to be able to give the taxpayers a great tool to use to see, how does local government perform? But even better, how does state government perform on these projects? And how do we compare to Wyoming, to Colorado, to Nevada on what our costs actually are?
Okay, so here's some of the topics that I wanted to cover, and I'm going to go through them, and I'm going to say, and if there's one that absolutely stands out to you, let's do that. So I said, let's talk about what you're doing. I think we've covered a fair amount of that. Are you taking a page from Doge? We've talked a little bit about that. We may want to dive into that a little bit more. What is the thing that pleased you the most that has been happening in our state since you took office? What is something you did not expect to see, positive or negative, since you took office? And what would you like to change if you could tell the state legislature which way they should vote? And what I mean by that is, if everybody at the state legislature would come to Tina and say, what should we do? What would you advise them to do? That's what, let me be clear.
Okay.
That's what I mean.
So let's go back to the Doge and how I love what they're doing, but I would say that Doge is the wrong acronym for this, that the Department of Government Efficiency is the wrong way to look at this, because a representative government is not designed to be efficient. It's designed to be exactly the opposite, because you're using somebody else's money. You're designing you're designed a government that was transparent. We're acting in somebody else's name. We're using their money to do this. We need to be transparent. So my office is the Government Office of Accountability and Transparency. That is GOAT, not Doge. So I push back over the Doge part of this. And I worry about the efficiency. And let me tell you why. I see this all the time, especially in smaller government entities, that we are trying to make a government that is efficient. When you're dealing with other people's money, that's the wrong direction. And that's asking for fraud. Because if you're the only person with oversight, that may be the most efficient way to go, but it gives an opportunity for theft that doesn't exist when you have a government that is designed for transparency. You want to make sure that you're an open process, that everyone knows where the money went and why it went there. And that is transparency, not efficiency. So a lot of times we will see in the fraud situations in government, it is because there is only one person who knew what was happening and how it was happening. And that gives an opportunity for fraud. So that's why I would push back on the efficiency. We are not a communist government where we just tell you what to do and nobody questions anything. We're a representative republic. And that means we make sure that that it is transparent for everyone. And that is not always the cheapest way to do it. And that would also be my push for the legislature is we have designed a system where we keep pushing for greater and greater efficiency, and that can happen and should be happening. But when you are not investing in the professional training of your staff in government, you lose that opportunity. So something that we are seeing across all of the departments in government is, and it's shocking for Utah because we are the Silicon Slopes of the West. We have access to all sorts of data analysts and new emerging technologies and making government more efficient. But we're not incentivizing governments to improve in that area. And stay tuned for another audit we are releasing next week over if you are not investing in your workforce, and that means qualified accounting staff who actually know how to reconcile a bank statement so you don't end up with fraud, how to close a period, some of these basic accounting things.
Reconciling bank statements is overrated,
These are
Tina.
the basics.
Come on.
How could we be missing the basics? But having come out of the private sector and spending 28 years looking at efficiencies in businesses in the private sector, coming into government is a little shocking that we are stuck in the past in how we do things, and then in making sure that we have qualified staff to do that. And that does not mean that I'm going to pull an operator off the line that is just trained in how to answer phone calls and making them a computer programmer. That usually doesn't work. Those are different skill sets. So those types of things. And so that's what I would hope to get across to the legislature, that we are not just looking for efficiencies, that we are looking for opportunities to improve. And that may be investing in your workforce so that you have the best people doing that job. I don't want the cheapest data analyst. It will take 10 really cheap data analysts to do what one really good qualified data analyst can do. And that's what I'm looking for. So we need to be able to bring that back in and make sure that we have the best people in government. And that would also be what I would look for in all of my Republican friends out there who are capitalists and doing really, really well in the private sector. Come join me in this retirement program I'm in, where I'm giving back to my community and really using those skill sets from the private sector and applying them into government and making sure that government has proper oversights in place. We could really use that as coming back in and using your skills in government and giving back to the community who made you successful.
So do you have a system
Yes.
for doing that? Okay, so what's that system look like?
We're always hiring CPAs in the office. And one of our best investigators came in after a 30-year career at working for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as an auditor, and we hired him. He has hit the ground running. He is phenomenal in his second career. And that has really been helpful for us in being able to use that experience level that comes after a successful career somewhere else, and that practical application of those auditing skills is really great. And we would love to see that happen across governments, that we are not,
Actually,
pardon me?
I could see how someone like that is very valuable. Why, John, do you say that? Because it's similar to a government organization as opposed to a business one, where the goal not necessarily is to be as efficient with money as possible. That person, I'll bet, is extremely valuable as opposed to maybe a different type of
Right. And
auditing
we're
experience.
trying to move away from, especially in my office, from a churn and burn mentality. And we get that a lot in government, that we bring them in as an intern and we churn, we work them really hard and we burn them out really quick and they move on. You lose that experience and you lose that professional skepticism that only comes with time. And a really good auditor has a lot of experience behind them. So we need a good balance of excitement about life but also experience, and coming back into government after a career somewhere else and applying those principles from the private sector in actually putting it to work in government, I think is where we're missing the boat. And we are so set on salaries. Someone from the governor's office told me that the goal was to be 10% below the market. I don't know how you compete with such a hot job
No,
market in Utah and think that you're getting really good people.
the fourth most expensive housing market in the United States, we want to be 10% under. Sounds like somebody's trying to
Yeah,
control you in the
this
governor's
is not,
office. I mean, you're not saying that,
yeah.
but I am.
And that would
Hello.
be the other thing, that if it is a salary that is appropriate to pay a legislative staff, then it should be a salary that is appropriate to pay the state auditor staff. Because if I can compare the Office of the Legislative Auditor, where they do not require a CPA education and certification, and the Office of the State Auditor, where we do require that, and I am 30 to 50% below what they are currently paying, and they are the other auditors on Capitol Hill, that creates a morale problem. That if it is okay, if that salary is appropriate for the legislative auditors, it is appropriate for the state auditors. So that seems like it just would be logical.
If they're a CPA. Yeah. Okay. So we've got like a minute and a half
This has
left
been
or
so
something
fun.
like
We'll
that,
have to do it again for another hour.
Depending on when Joel Skousen, hey, if Joel Skousen doesn't go, if he joins us late, like it's happened a few times, every time pretty much, then we'll have a few more minutes. But I want to ask this: what have you been positively surprised when you got in? You were like, boy, this is better than what I thought it was going to be.
I think it has been the relationship with those. I think the best way to put this without exposing someone who doesn't want to know doesn't want the public to know they have a good relationship with me, is that holding government accountable is bipartisan, and people really want government to be transparent. And I have a good relationship with members of the opposite party because of that. When you're in a
Of course you would. Of course you
well,
would.
that's not necessarily where I thought that was going. So I'm very surprised by it, because I think that we share a common goal in holding government accountable and wanting everyone to know what's going on, where the money's going, how it's being spent is a bipartisan desire in the state of Utah. I think we see that.
Okay. I want to know, is it on a state level or a level below that that would be meaning county or city?
That where I see that kind of cooperation?
Yes. Is that okay? You're thinking of a specific.
There's only one
Is that on
or two
a
counties.
state level?
That's on the state level. I see that on the state level. We still get a little pushback, or we have a couple counties who are not good actors all the time.
Salt Lake County, and
didn't say
especially Salt Lake City. I might guess that they're and West Valley City also. I think they're more Democrat.
I would say when it comes to restricted use on government money, it's Grand County that we struggle with the most. They just don't want to comply, and there's a solution for that. Don't impose a tax you disagree with.
Okay. Well, Tina, Joel Skousen has joined us. So I'm going to say take 20 seconds. Let the public know if there's any way to reach out to you, anything along those lines, anything you want them to know. You got about 20 seconds.
Anytime you want to come in and learn more about transparent.utah.gov, we have an office that's open weekdays from 8 to 5, and we will show you how to use the tools, or you can follow along at home at transparent.utah.gov. You can always get a hold of my office, and if you have suggestions for how to improve the site, please let us know that. We make that data available for everyone. If you want to be a super user and we hand you the data and you do your own analysis, contact us. We will give you access to it and help you in building a data set of your own that you can analyze. So we want to make sure that the public has access to everything that we have and that you know what we know. And that is where every dollar of Utah taxpayer money is spent.
Have a safe trip back, Tina. I'm going to have you on in the next couple of months because I want to find about these other things. Have a great one. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, folks, that was Tina Cannon, Utah State Auditor. We are so grateful that she joined us. I'll be bringing in Joel Skousen, who is our next guest. I'll be bringing him on momentarily, but first want to take a real quick breath and mention once again, folks, you are watching and listening to this on KMMU Main Street Media Utah. We are live on Rumble, X, YouTube, and our website kmmu.org. Feel free to give us a call or to talk with myself or ask Joel a question at 385-899-2134. That's 385-899-2134. It's right there on the screen, so you can see. Yeah, right there at the bottom of the screen, the other side. There we go. Well, I'm not going to try aiming. But, folks, feel free. And not only that, our lowly call screener, Dwayne, definitely is willing to take your call, and we'll get your question asked to Joel. So, Tina Cannon, thank you so much for joining us. Let me also do real quickly the top of the hour show prayer and show mantra. Now, folks, this is just the prayer of my heart. This is when it comes to doing this show, that's what I esteem to live up to. I hope my show is a gift back to my forefathers, the founding fathers, and may it be an acceptable token to our Father above. Then the show mantra: where there is liberty, there is the Spirit of Christ. Where the Spirit of Christ is, there will be liberty. And the greater the Spirit of Christ, the greater liberty will be. Now, speaking of that, there are very few people in this world that I'm bringing on Joel Skousen. There are very few people that I can think of that applies to more, being wrapped up and being a true man that is fighting for liberty, than Joel Skousen. Joel Skousen is the editor of World Affairs Brief. He has been a political commentator for decades, one of the most experienced people. And so why is that so important, John? Why is that so important? Because he's seen so many cycles of things happening. He can and has so much experience, like the phony fall of communism in Russia, shall we say. He talks about that, 9/11, so many other things. So the bottom line is, you can go to his website at worldaffairs.com, I believe.
Worldaffairsbrief.com.
Brief.com, sorry. Worldaffairsbrief.com. And so, Joel, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate you being here.
Well, it's a pleasure, John. Thank you for those kind words in the introduction.
Well, it's true. So I wouldn't be saying it if it wasn't 100% true. So I've been listening to Joel since probably in the 90s, late 90s, definitely by 2000. I was listening. In fact, I know it was even before then. Listening to him when he would come on with Tom Drashel. We lost a good one in Tom Drashel. One of the best, in my opinion. Tom, you're missed. And I hope you're doing some good work on the others. I know you're doing good work on the other side, trying to help us on this side. So, so I'm just going to give a shout out to K-Talk. That's where I first got to know you. Then I wound up being a producer for one of their other hosts. And now I've got you on my show. and look forward to having you on. There are a number of topics that I want to cover with you. Is there anything, when I sent you the show topics, I also forgot to mention what's happening with Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, saying that the Epstein files, the Epstein killed himself. So that is definitely a topic. But let me give you a few other topics that may be up for consideration. Ukraine takes the attack deep into Russia. The LA riots, and I'm going to say the LA left riots, in my opinion. Turmoil in China. Trump-Putin standoff gets worse, and Trump, the great disruptor, are several topics that I think we could talk about. And Joel, if there's anything else that you think is as important or more important to talk about, let's do. But you're the guest, and on top of that, I don't just have a guest. I've got like the guest. So you tell me what you'd like to talk about first and what you think is the most important to share with the audience.
Well, of course, the hottest topic right now are the LA riots, and this is the summer riot season, and these were planned. Wall Street Journal's put out quite a bit of information on the various NGOs that are funded by taxpayer money, at least in California, and that are funding a lot of these riots. And in fact, Fox News had a video cameraman out and saw one of these NGOs handing out gas masks and other protective equipment to rioters. And so, this is definitely a planned event. And of course, the Communist Party is always involved in riots trying to disrupt the United States. The mayor of Los Angeles, of course, is a dyed-in-the-wool member of Bensedemos.
I'm hoping that was Joel Skousen that dropped off. And let's see if we got him back. Let's see if we can get him back, or I hope it's not me. Joel, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm back. Do you see me now?
I do see you. So you were talking about the LA mayor and her background.
Yeah, she's got a radical leftist background. She has been a visitor to Cuba many times. She's a member of the Venceremos, which means we conquer in Spanish, brigade, which is for all things pro-communist and pro-Castro. So this is a very radical woman who is, of course, attempting to block ICE and condemn ICE for doing their systematic raids within the LA territory. And of course, Governor Newsom is involved. He's suing the Trump administration, claiming that what they're doing is illegal. I don't think that's going to hold up, other than, there's always a leftist judge to judge shop, but I don't think it's going to hold up even in the Ninth Circuit when it's put on appeal. But this is a predictable event. It's going to be worse. It's one of the interesting things that you have a lot of the illegals that are involved in this, waving the Mexican flag. So why did they leave Mexico if it's such a wonderful place that they're waving the Mexican flag? And of course, the president of Mexico, the very hard left Jewish president, Mrs. Sheinbaum, has protested vigorously the 5% tax that Donald Trump wants to put on all transfer payments that are made between U.S. Latinos and Mexican. It amounts to over $6 billion. It's the biggest source of income, including over oil income, in Mexico, are these transfer payments. So this is a big deal, and she is making a big stink about it. And as I've covered in the World Affairs Brief, every one of the high top officials are on the payroll of the cartels. I mean, they're paid off at least to the tune of $100,000 a year in order to basically not prosecute. Now, they do some prosecution, but it's only at the small level. That's why Sheinbaum was very, very critical of Donald Trump, wanted to use special forces to come in and get rid of the cartel problem. Right. Normally you would think you would welcome that, a big, powerful country coming in to get rid of your drug cartels, but not in Mexico.
Well, okay, so I'm going to give her this kind of. Not really, but kind of. She might be told, listen, if you don't fight this, we're going to kill you. And we'll kill those close to you.
Who might be saying that? Who
The
might be
cartels.
saying that?
The cartels might be telling that to the president of Mexico.
Yeah, it's very possible. They're ruthless and they know it, but money is easier to do than get rid of a compliant puppet through assassination. That's a tough thing
Right.
to deal with. And that might, in fact, cause a public uproar in Mexico to get rid of the cartels, which they wouldn't want.
Right. Okay. So, but also, you help bring forward, speaking of the cartels, you will help give money and support and try to get the people voted into power that you wanted voted in power, right? Is another thought process. I want to drill down just a little bit on California and the LA mayors. I mean, and Governor Newsom. I mean, the last 12 months has been fantastic for those individuals on making sure that things are run perfectly in California. I mean, it's got to be one of the best run states. I mean, it's not like they let a whole city burn down or several cities burn down, right? And make sure that they made sure that their fire department was taken care of. And now they're doing a great job of supporting law and order and virtually peaceful protesting, right?
Well, California is also bankrupt. They haven't declared it officially yet, but there's no way to pay off the billions and billions of dollars of debt that California's racked up. What business do they have giving multiple millions to these NGOs to support, illegal immigration? And that's what they're doing. Yeah. So it's Trump is, in fact, told security that he backs the arrest of the California governor, and I think that would be foolish because that would certainly play into the left's hand. But clearly, if he's backing illegal immigration, any state or local leader ought to be removed from office for violating the law.
I would concur. So, how do you think President Trump should handle this scenario? Because I'm hearing both on the right and on the left. I'm hearing people on the right saying this is exactly what we want Donald Trump to do, and then other people on the right are saying let's just let California implode on itself and burn itself down.
Well, there's something to be said for that last comment. I mean, it's like public schooling. I don't believe in improving public schools. I think the sooner they implode and the worse they get, the better, because it'll drive good people out of them. And right now, of course, because we all have to pay taxes for that, people stay with the public schools and try to improve them. But there is an evil agenda there because they take everybody's tax money, and there's an evil agenda going on in California. And a lot of people's property, of course, is at risk there. There has been a lot of looting now going on because the police are so tied up with the riots. And then you have, the case of several police cars that were stuck under an overpass, and they pummeled them with bricks and concrete masonry blocks and other things, which is, deadly projectiles.
Right.
So Donald Trump's given the order that anybody wearing a mask needs to be arrested, and I would agree with that. There's no pandemic. They're wearing a mask to conceal their identity. I'd round them all up, and everyone that's illegal, I'd deport.
Well, back in the summer of love of 2020, that is something that I was saying on my radio show. The reason why they want masks on people is so when the public becomes conditioned to accept masks. Because before 2020, if you saw someone wearing a mask, you question that individual as being someone. Your mind immediately went to, this is a nefarious actor if they had any type of mask on their face. As of the summer of 2020, the general public did a mind shift and flipped their mindset of, okay, these are people that we should trust. And so it became acceptable for people to wear masks while doing these type of things. To me, it's absolutely something that you wear a mask and you're out there in a protest. Soon as the immediate moment that you do something wrong, I don't know that I necessarily want to give them a terrorism charge, but they should be gone after much more harshly than the average individual.
Well, of course, there's the stupid factor too. Like even during the pandemic, when you see people driving alone in their car with a mask.
That was crazy. That was crazy. You're doing more harm to yourself when you've got that mask on. I mean, you're doing nothing but harm to yourself. Okay, all right. Well, let's unless you've got anything else that you want to mention about the LA riot.
I think this is in for the long haul. This is only getting started, and it's expanding now to Chicago and Denver and other Democratic strongholds, where they're starting to pick up, and the Communist Party is starting to organize, as well as NGOs, riots and protests in behalf of illegal aliens. So I expect this is going to sweep the country this summer. So we're not anywhere near done with this.
My question is how many cities and states is this getting to? I think I agree. It's just getting to start in California. I think this is going to be going into Minnesota. I think it's going to be going to probably Colorado. The question is does it get into Texas? Definitely does it get here into Utah? I very much see this even coming to Salt Lake City, possibly even Provo. So I think this could, I'm going to wax a little scriptural when it comes to those of you that might be members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We have some scriptural references that the seed of Jacob's going to be coming through and tearing people asunder. So I am going, is this part of that whole thought? Is that possibly what's going to be happening? I'll let you respond to that in just a minute, but I do want to mention, hey, folks, you are watching and listening to us on KMMU Mainstream Media, Utah. We're live on Rumble, X, and YouTube, and our website, kmmu.org. Give us a call and talk to Joel. You can do that if you'd like. We haven't had any calls recently, and most of the time, we just have people, just about every show we have listening. And I know that we'll have hundreds of listeners that don't even call in, but the call-in line is 385-899-2134. That's 385-899-2134. All right. So Joel, any thoughts on surrounding states, what you think is most likely? And then if you want to make a comment, he just dropped out, but I'll bet you he'll be coming right back. There we go. All right. So any thoughts you want to finish up on just kind of my commentary, especially when it comes to the thoughts on the church, on Joel, your thoughts?
Well, I was disappointed with how much positive press KSL is giving to the Pride Parade going into Salt Lake City this weekend. It's one thing to be semi-tolerant, but to be promoting this only in a positive light and interviewing people about their rights, et cetera, being violated by Donald Trump. I mean, this kind of pushing the gay and transgender agenda for a church that doesn't theologically believe that it is appropriate to be gay or transgender is a problem, I believe.
Well, I'm just going to say this. Let's say it was a bunch of straight people. You're using a terrible word to say what you are. Pride. I don't know anywhere biblically where God has too great a favor on people that are prideful. I mean, I just don't remember anything that the Lord was ever pleased with that. Okay. What do you want to hit next? What topic do you want to get to next to? Ukraine, China in turmoil, Trump, Putin, or Trump being the great disruptor?
Well, let's talk about China a little bit, because this was a new breaking story that I covered in the World Affairs Brief, courtesy of the Epoch Times, which are anti-communist Chinese-owned newspaper, one of the best in the United States. But there's a few insiders within the Communist Party that say that there's some great dissatisfaction between the party regime and the party, especially because of the dramatic downturn in the Chinese. Trump, in one fell swoop, destroyed the export market in China. And even though he's put a temporary hold on this, I mean, the only good thing about Donald Trump's tariffs were the fact that it started to wean Americans away from Chinese goods. And I'm telling you, it's a big thing. We are addicted to 80% of our consumer goods are made in China, 80%. And so it's a very, very difficult thing. Build up the Chinese military industrial complex right now, and much cheaper in terms of production of war materials, etc. Now, of course, there's also the real estate collapse that's been going on. The Chinese middle class, which was created by all of this trade with the United States and Europe, the middle class was only allowed to invest in real estate. They weren't allowed to invest in a normal stock market type things. And so it created a real estate bubble. Ghost cities were built, apartments were built one after another. Right. And they didn't even have to fill them. They would basically, the demand was so hot to buy and sell for a profit because they were inflating the currency at the same time. So the inflation value of these apartments were going up. So people would buy and sell and leverage economy, their money in these apartment and the banks are having to foreclose on a lot of.
Okay, so here's a question that I have for you, Joel. Do you see that it's so one of the things that they're mentioned is there's some great dissatisfaction. Do you and that Xi might actually be in trouble? Did I understand that correctly from your brief?
You'll have to repeat that. We lost the connection during your question.
Okay, so if I remember correctly, from last week's brief that talked about the China issue, China having some internal issues, and you mentioned just a few minutes ago that the Epoch Times is talking about some internal people not being pleased with Xi. Do you think does Xi have any reason to be concerned on his position of power? Or is this just a whole Communist Party problem?
Well, the Communist Party has always been beset by infighting because it's a pyramid of power. And so the only way you really gain power is by knocking off other people around you and undermining them. So they're always having these infighting problems. I actually said in the brief that I don't think that Xi is going to be replaced just because he is so good at giving a pleasing face and fooling Donald Trump. I mean, he knows how to flatter Trump. He taught Kim Jong-un in North Korea how to flatter Trump to be able to get rid of the difficulty. He just talked on the phone to Donald Trump and got him to claim that he made a deal. Xi gave in on the United States, agreed to at a favorable rate so Donald Trump could have a win. You see, Donald Trump has to have a deal, a winning deal, otherwise he's never satisfied. So as long as the nation gives him the possibility of saying, I've had a win here, they can get Donald Trump to do almost anything they want to him. So I don't think Xi's in trouble in the sense that there's real dissatisfaction with him, but I don't think it's sufficient to remove Xi because of the international player that he is and his ability to fool the West with the smile and the flattery.
Okay. Is the Communist Party in trouble? Because there are some that are on the right that's like, oh, China's close to falling. They're close to imploding on themselves.
No, I don't think so.
Like,
the Chinese don't have any arms. You had Tiananmen Square. They mowed down people with ease, and they would do it again. Hong Kong has not been able to throw off the communist And that's from a country that was used to a fair amount of freedom under the British. And if they weren't able to stop the communist juggernaut, they won't in China. Absolute power rules, especially when you don't have private arms to be able to fight a revolution. So I don't think the Communist Party's in difficulty.
Do you see any disruption in their building up their military, or any of their military, whether it be Navy, to their nuclear missiles, to the airplanes, even to their space exploration? Do you see them just continuing the march that they're on, or do you see that slowing down?
I don't think the economic problems are going to stop the military-industrial complex just because they have a command economy in that regard. And they can mandate as many workers for what pay, and they can, of course, print the money, which they're doing, to pay the workers. That's why it's the military component of inflation is very, very high in China. And so I don't see that stopping. And Chinese quality has improved tremendously through spying and through theft of intellectual property, et cetera, and all the years of manufacturing expertise that we've allowed them to gain by transferring technology from our Western companies as a condition of doing business in China.
Okay, if there's someone that I can think of that I might be able to answer this question, I got two questions. One that's somewhat on topic and one that's completely off. But since I've got a former F-4 Phantom pilot with me, what do you know about the stealth planes that they are currently building? And do you have any thoughts? And so that's somewhat on topic, meaning China. How comparable are they to the United States aircraft? And any thoughts on the new aircraft that is being designed by the United States, the F-47? And I realize that is not necessarily something I mentioned I was going to talk to you about it, but I'm like, F-47 just came to my mind. I've got you on.
Well, one of the things about stealth technology that is little known by the public is it's very maintenance intensive to try to keep those stealth coatings up to par. And they're always changing those coatings to improve, as well as, masking the engine intakes when it's coming towards the radar is always a problem. And the F-47 is solving that problem. The biggest problem the F-47 is facing now is that Donald Trump has intervened with the Air Force and saying that I want a new F-35 with two engines, and you can't do that without totally redesigning the airplane, but he thinks he can. And when the president decides he's going to do something, he's going to divert a lot of money away from the F-47, which is a sixth generation fighter, highly stealth oriented, delta wing oriented. It's not meant to be a dogfighter like the F-15 is. The F-15 is a brilliant aircraft. The F-35's not a really good dogfighter either, right. But it can certainly do what no other aircraft can do, in the sense that it can coordinate the battle plan of what's called combined arms, where you coordinate between ground troops with armor and with missiles and with ECM, electronic countermeasure jamming. The F-35 can do that with one aircraft, and now is being upgraded software-wise to handle several drone aircraft that will be flying beside it to protect it. The F-47 can do all of those things too. And so, but as I say, I think the problem is going to be money. Because when Donald Trump says he wants a new F-35 with two engines, it's a whole new ballgame. It's a whole new aircraft. There's no way to just fit two engines in that existing fuselage.
So why do you think he wanted to do that? Just ego? Or is there any legitimate reason for the two engines? I mean, I don't get me wrong. I understand you got an F-16, one engine goes out. Well, that's all you have, right? Versus the F-15, you've got one engine go out on the F-15 or the F-4 Phantom. You've at least got another one up and running. But is it ego that's causing him to do this? And why he's doing it when he's got the it's going to be the F-47. Man, if I was him, I'd totally be like, yeah, get it up and running. It's got to be the best and the greatest ever.
Well, the problem with Donald Trump is that he is the only show in town. He will not take criticism, and so he's surrounded himself by a lot of yes men. And it's like tariffs. I mean, tariffs is a terrible idea. We have long become a global economy and importing goods that are cheaper and better than can be manufactured because we don't have, other countries don't have OSHA. They don't have the inflation that we have. They don't have the regulations. They don't have to pay Social Security for the workers. There's no way that bringing jobs back, is going to improve the economy because those companies, if they do come back, are going to raise their prices. They have to raise their prices. They cannot do it as cheaply as they can. Now, I'm not in favor of trading with China, but there's certainly a lot of other countries that we can trade with. But so this is just a bad, egotistical idea of Donald Trump to have a super F-35. It's just a bad idea. And it didn't come up from the military and any of the services. It came up from somebody who has Trump's ear, and he took the idea and says, let's run with this. And I don't think he came up with tariffs on his own. I think he brought in a few people that think that tariffs are great and a good way to raise tax money. Of course, it's a terrible tax on the American people, a terrible tax on the American people. So these are some of the bad ideas that Donald Trump, and of course, in the other third area of Donald Trump has been abysmal at is his peace at any cost anti-war scenario. I mean, he surrounded himself by a lot of conservatives, and I've been critical of my fellow conservatives who think that Russia and China are good guys because our own deep state is against them. Anybody our deep state is against must be a good guy. They picked that up in the war on terror when it was actually true. Iraq and Afghanistan had nothing to do with the 9/11, which was a deep state operation from beginning to end. And so, the conservatives did have a point. The U.S. created Al-Qaeda. They created ISIS. They created terrorism. So to many libertarian conservatives like Ron Paul, who's a good friend of mine, or many of the libertarians really think that Russia and China's wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for our own deep state. And that's not true. They do not understand systematic evil in the world, that satanic forces really control three major predator powers: Russia, China, and our own globalists. And Russia and China are not against our globalists because they are going to give us our liberty. It's because they want to start their own version of their new world order, which would be much more tyrannical than the globalists do, because the globalists at least have to play lip service to liberty. They have to play lip service to rights. Not so in China or Russia. It's just an iron fist.
Thank you for those thoughts. Let's kind of go into that a little bit more. Let's go to Trump-Putin standoff gets worse.
Well, I am glad that Putin has not played up to Donald Trump. He's been absolutely ruthless with Ukraine. Every time there's a peace talks, he does a blitz on Ukraine. With the latest one was 350 drone attack. Actually ended up being over 400, and then Ukraine struck back 4 or 5 major strategic bases with blackjack bombers as well as bear bombers and their long-term nuclear strategic arsenals. They destroyed about 41 of them. And of course, the American right tends to say that, the CIA must have been involved, that Ukraine couldn't have done this. And this isn't true at all. I critique that in the World Affairs Brief because, one of the right-wing commentators said, you have the CIA or British intelligence had to provide GPS coordinates for those drones to strike those things. And that's not true at all. Drones that Ukraine are using have a television screen on the operator. And they have a camera in the drone. They can basically fly it as if they're flying an airplane. And they took these drones in on trucks inside mobile homes or some type of modular home where the roof would open up and the drones would fly out once that truck got near the Air Force base. where they were headed to. And then from then on, the guys that are controlling the drone looks at their controller, which is like a TV screen, and they see what the drone is seeing, and they fly right through, hit aircraft. They don't need GPS coordinates. It's very hard to jam. You can jam because you have to jam the radio signals, but if you don't know in advance what frequency they're going to be on, it's a little difficult. And this attack did catch the Russians completely flat-footed. And so Putin is in the process of retaliating heavily against Ukraine.
Okay, so let me ask you this. If you were advising Zelensky, would have you advised him to do attacks similar to that?
Yeah, I say take the war to Russia. He's doing the right thing. Make Russia pay a heavy price. And as I covered in the World Affairs Brief, the Blackjack bomber, the Tupolev 160, is the only one of those bombers that's still in production. Very limited production, however. So Russia is not economically able to really increase or replace a lot of those. The Bear bombers have been out of production for many, many years. But the Blackjack, which is a copy of our B-1 bomber, is in production, and they can eventually replace those. But it's going to be very painful. And I think they need to continue to hit Russia's oil facilities. And of course, Putin continues to threaten, the West. If you use your weapons against Russia that will nuke you. But as I say, he can't nuke the West without being able to occupy. If you can't occupy, then the West simply rebuilds and comes back after you. And of course, that's not counting all the retaliatory missiles that the U.S. can throw at Russia or the West with their submarines once we determine that they have launched nuclear missiles at us, because we have at least 20 to 30 minutes warning once those missiles take off and are noted by the infrared cameras on our satellites.
Now, how big of a hit was it to, and this is something you've been talking about for years, is that they've been making, speaking of Russia, has been making their nuclear missile, building their nuclear missile force against treaties over the years. And so what are your thoughts along those lines? And then one of the biggest concerns that I have from what happened over in Russia, what Ukraine did, man, we are staring down the barrel of the gun at the same thing here happening in the United States.
Well, yes, we don't have preparations against mass drone attacks either. Now, Ukraine shares borders with Russia, so they could have those trucks with permits to drive over the border with those drones in it without them knowing about it. It'd be a little bit harder to do that in the United States, but they can do that. And so the U.S. is working overtime right now and trying to build anti-drone defenses, everything from automatic shotguns to lasers and other things to shoot down, and of course jamming equipment on drones. But we're very vulnerable because our aircraft are out in the open as well, just like Russia's, where they're parked on the tarmac. Very few, except for our B-1 bombers that do have some protection around them. B-2 bombers. All the rest of our, including B-52s, are sitting out there on the tarmac on the major aircraft carriers. Air bases. And I'll tell you, it's very difficult to provide bomb-proof shelters for an aircraft like the B-52, that has hundreds of feet of wingspan. That's a huge shelter.
Right.
And, none of those shelters will withstand a nuclear attack. They might withstand drone attacks, except that most of those shelters don't have doors on them. So the drone can fly right in the front of the Quonset type, shelter, which is a very strong, if it's in concrete, type of shelter. But drones can fly right inside those. So this is a major problem.
What about the nuclear missile force that they have?
Well, it's about 10 times larger than the United States. We have capped ours at just a little over 400 of our Minuteman III missiles, which are now Minuteman I missiles, since we took off 3 warheads to comply with START 1. And now Russian and Chinese, of course, Chinese aren't even a party to any of these disarmament things, but the Russians have 15 warheads per missile. So here we did, as a measure of what, good faith or stupidity, we take off 3 warheads down to 1, and the Russians go to 15. And remember that during the Nixon administration, it's the United States that gave the Russians the miniature ball bearing technology that they needed to create the miniature gyros that for guidance for these multiple warheads on missiles. Prior to the Nixon administration, the Russians only had 1 missile per warhead. I mean, 1 warhead per missile.
Okay, so did we do, not we, but did Ukraine do a significant attack on Russia that you think that might be able to slow them down? Or did they just make Putin go, that's it, it's time for me to go whole hog?
Well, in any case, Putin has burned his bridges with Donald Trump. He has disabused Trump of this notion that Putin's a nice guy and that Donald Trump can stop the war with 1 telephone call. He hasn't done that. Putin just told him flat out, no, I'm going to, Putin. Trump asked him not to retaliate over this, and Putin said, no, of course I'm going to retaliate. So he threw it back in Trump's face. And so Trump still gave him 2 more weeks to come to terms in a peace deal. And Putin's not going to accept that. Putin's terms are, of course, is that Ukraine be almost totally disarmed and they get no more weapons or support from the West, which is a death knell. That means that Russia would be free, of course, to build up their armed forces in the interim time, and whereas Ukraine would not. And of course, there will be a provoked breaking of the ceasefire, which will involve a massive Russian invasion. So Russia is currently doing another major invasion right now of Ukraine, and Trump is very upset, as he should be. And I think the peace deal of Trump is dead forever, and I'm glad for it, because the only way to make a peace deal with the communists is to give in to them of what they want. And what's next after Ukraine are the Balkans, the Baltics, the 3 states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And that's why NATO is beefing up the military in those 3 states right now, knowing that Putin is there. Now, the American conservatives are lambasting NATO for claiming that Russia's an enemy. I don't know how to get through to my fellow conservatives that Russia is and always has been an existential enemy, along with China. But they just can't be talked out of it.
Well, I think there will come a time that they see otherwise.
I'm not so sure. When Russia even strikes us, they'll say the U.S. provoked it. The U.S. caused it. It wasn't the Russians' fault. They were just being defensive. I mean, bad thinking in terms of our own government's the only enemy on the face of the planet. Bad thinking is really bad, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Well, I would say there's, and this is one thing that I try to share. Yeah, we've got some very bad actors, but Russia and China have a great history of at least a bad actors, if not worse.
Yeah, I mean, at least the own globalists try to hide their secret assassinations. They do it more openly. I mean, look at Putin, even assassinated his major competitor politically. And he killed Boris Berezovsky, his mentor, the oligarch who brought him to power. He had him poisoned in London. So these are very bad actors. It hasn't changed. There are no good guys in these 3 predator states, including our own government.
Right. Totally, we concur with that statement. Let's see. I think we've hit just about everything. Just a quick thought on your you had a piece in the World Affairs Brief where it says Trump the Great Disruptor, and then I'd like to get to this week's upcoming brief. Dan Bongino, Patel, and as well as Jeffrey Epstein. So let's hit Trump the Great Disruptor, and then let's jump into the last segment.
Well, Trump is the great disruptor. It's because of his narcissistic, egotistical personality. In essence, he makes a decision. He surrounded himself with yes men. It's very different, than the first administration where he was surrounded. He didn't know anybody. He depended on Reince Priebus of the Republican National Committee to staff the West Wing of the White House with 4,000 people, and that's why you got a lot of deep staters in there. And but Donald Trump is right now just. It's all about Donald Trump. It's all about making me look good. It's about what I want, and nobody is saying no to Donald Trump. I mean, there have been some people talking to him about the tariffs or making your own supporters mad, and that's about the only way to get through to Donald Trump, is say the MAGA crowd is displeased with what you're doing with tariffs, because there's a lot of small businesses that are really being hurt with this tariffs. Who's paying? Who's paying for all of the changing in prices when Donald Trump changes the tariff from day to day? Who's paying for all that? I mean, that's just tremendously disruptive to the economy. And that's why I called Donald Trump the great disruptor. And he doesn't care. When he gets the idea that I'm going to do something, it's going to be a big, wonderful deal, like this big, wonderful bill. I mean, he just can't take criticism. Elon Musk is absolutely right about that. This is a monstrosity in terms of payments. And Donald Trump is absolutely wrong about this budget bill, that the deficit is going to be offset by growth. His growth projections are about 2.9% GDP, but inflation is 7 to 9% real inflation still. And so there's no growth in the economy. All the growth figures in the economy are because of inflation, not because there's any real growth. So I'm not buying that this deficit is going to be reduced by growth.
Is there any positives to him being as stubborn as he is?
Well, he has been good on DEI. Even though the courts have blocked about 70% of his initiatives, Dodge has still made some significant contributions, and they have discovered so many secret payment systems, just like the 4.7 trillion they found disbursements from the Treasury without a spending code. You're supposed to put a code so they can be tracked about what is the justification for this. And a tremendous amount of many trillions have been sent out without any the specialty code allocating, and where they're traceable to what they've been spent for. So he's done some tremendous good. Elon Musk has done some really good and cut off a lot of things that we didn't know were going on, like in the Green New Deal. They were the energy Department of Energy was shoveling out $20 billion out the door to various companies, just getting rid of the money before Trump came in.
Right.
And a lot of that stuff has been stopped. Many of the payments to the NGOs that were giving money to illegal aliens and keeping them in the hotels and other things has been stopped. And so there's some wonderful things that Donald Trump has done in the border, but I'm afraid it's not going to be offset by the damage to the economy that tariffs will do, the disruption. I'm not sure, thanks to Putin showing his hand as a ruthless individual, he's not going to get his sellout of Ukraine, which would have happened. And it would have been a big deal. Donald Trump was aiming for a Nobel Peace Prize for getting rid of the war in Ukraine, but it would have been a disaster for Ukraine.
Well, let's get to Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, and to Jeffrey Epstein. This is, I can't remember if we've discussed this or if I've shared this with you, but I think what
conspiracy. This is a lack of understanding. I mean, as I published in the World Affairs Brief, the designer of the jail cells, the specialty jail cells, anti-suicide jail cells, wrote that it was impossible for him to commit suicide in one of those jail cells. There is nothing to hang yourself from. The hooks on the wall for clothes break at 60 pounds. The light fixture has nothing to, it's flush with the ceiling. There's nothing to hook onto. There's just no way, even on the bunk beds in there, to attach anything to hang yourself with. So he had to be killed. Now, there are a lot of conspiracy theories which have no proof whatsoever, saying that, well, they actually faked his death and he's in some wealthy dig somewhere and they're hiding him because, in witness protection program, etc. But I don't find any evidence whatsoever at all. I mean, anything's possible with the deep state. But Jeffrey Epstein was entirely disposable, in my opinion. I mean, here's a guy who knew too much about their honeypot schemes to blackmail people. And I don't think they had to blackmail most people who came to these are willing participants. But they do film what's going on just in case someone gets cold feet and starts to spill the beans, with the press. They can pull this out and threaten them. But it's very evil.
I want your thoughts on this. An interesting concept that was shared, and I can't remember where I heard it from. It's interesting that the Bidens are nowhere around this when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, or at least definitely going to on his Lolita Express that we know of, or going to his island. Any thoughts there?
Biden, of course, had his own private immoral liaisons going on, which was proven in the Biden laptop. And Joe Biden, this is a guy who is, can't keep his hands off young women or women, etc. I mean, they were in the protection mode. This was just a pure puppet. They only took really smart people out there, people that they were trying to bring into the fold, not people who were already puppets and who were half senile and not capable of being a threat to anybody in their system. This is something this is a recruitment technique and a blackmail technique. But Biden was in their pocket, and so was Kamala Harris. She didn't have to go. I mean, she slept her way up to the ladder to politics.
Okay. Do you think that Jeffrey Epstein was being run by the Israelis or by the CIA?
Well, too many conservatives make too much of the Israeli connection. The Israelis are very deeply connected with our own deep state. They do most of the international assassinations. They're very expert at what they do. They did not do 9/11. They had observers there filming what was going on, but they did not do 9/11. They have integrated themselves into many of the deep state surveillance technologies, which are run by Israeli companies, etc. So there is an incestuous relationship between the Israelis, but the deep state is much bigger than Israel. And Israel does not control the deep state. It's a part of the deep state, but it's not the controlling factor.
That was my suspicion. That's been my suspicion as well, that the CIA is really the one that's in the control, and that now, not to say that Israel doesn't do their own thing, but see, this is my statement to when it comes to Israelis controlling the United States. If us Christians here in the United States would be more Christian, they would have no control. How was Israel destroyed? It was destroyed from within first, before it was destroyed from without. So, if we as American citizens were more Christian and we're holding our elected officials to be more Christian, you wouldn't see Israel having the control it does, and you wouldn't see China having the control that it does.
My only disagreement with what you're saying there is being Christian is far too generic to do any good. Most of the Christian churches are
Okay.
soft thinking now, believing in unconditional love, unconditional acceptance, unconditional tolerance, etc., of the things going on in the world. So being Christian, I mean, look at the fact that one of the congressmen revealed that every congressman in the U.S. Congress is on the take of money from Israel, including a lot of Christians are on the take.
Right.
And that's because they have believed philosophically that Israel is the fulfillment of a biblical prophecy of the return of Israel. But that doesn't mean that Israel is blessed of the Lord or Israel is the chosen people. I mean, Christ himself said he could raise up stones to Israel easier than these people because of their rebelliousness against the Christ. But no, Christianity is too generic of a litmus test to solve anything with. You've got to have the proper theology. You've got to listen to conscience. It's much more than just following the commandments. And there's a lot of bad doctrine within Christian churches today, like being once saved, always saved, that you don't have to worry, if you've had one born again experience. It's just bogus. And of course, there's the rapture problem about we're not going to go through the tribulation. That's never happened. Christ, the God, has never saved his people from tribulation because that's what toughens people. That's what tests their mettle, etc. And we're going to go through the tribulation. Yes, there is a rapture, but that's at the second coming, and that comes after the tribulation.
What are your thoughts with, do you think that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino know what's really going on, or do you think the truth was hidden from them? Because as you explained in great detail in the World Affairs Brief and just here a few moments ago, why Jeffrey Epstein could not have hung himself. I mean, and not only that, the ligature that's around his neck is not consistent with a blanket. It's more consistent with a cord. What do you think that they are part of the conspiracy, or do you think that they are being? They said from the. I think one of their verbiage was one of them said, "From the files I've seen," key phrase, "files I've seen," he did it himself. It was a suicide. What are your thoughts there?
Well, the deep state obviously created those files and fed them to them. But you see, they came in without the background of conspiracy. Neither of them understand that 9/11 was a deep state operation from beginning to end. The deep state always has rational excuses to explain away almost everything, but they're usually lies, just like anything promoting that Epstein hung himself. Now, if he did get strangled, it was not because he did it in a hanging type manner that it was suicide. He got strangled, with a cord.
Yes. So the photos that have been attributed to the strangulation of Jeffrey Epstein looks a lot more like a cord than it looks like blankets.
Yeah.
Or
blankets
even strips
don't leave
of
a mark. Yeah. And what do you hang them on?
Right. That was the other thing that you pointed out in your World Affairs Brief. Okay. Well, we're pretty much out of time, Joel. I want to say, if you've got any last thoughts, please share that with us. Otherwise, we want to make sure I'm going to say, Dwayne, if you're still there, my friend, will you please bring up Joel's website so people can see what his website is, both joelskousen.com and the worldaffairsbrief.com. We've got that up now. So, Joel, last thoughts.
Well, on the left-hand side, you can have hit on request a sample, which will give you the current brief there on the website and tells you options on how to subscribe. There is a modest subscription to support my work. And I know people are used to getting everything free on the internet or on the radio, but you won't get my unique analysis of the deep state and Donald Trump except by subscribing to the World Affairs Brief.
Hey, folks, it's a buck a week, less than $1 a week. It's totally worth it. And I think I just re-upped my subscription, and I think I did it for 3 years. It was at least 2, but I want to say 3. But I just re-upped that about a month ago.
Well, thank you, John. It's only a maximum of 2 years that you can subscribe for.
Okay. And the other thing is you get the MP3 version that your son shares with or reads for people, as well as and that's Andrew Skousen, and he's an editor, and he also does the preparedness tips. So, last thoughts, Joel, before you. First of all, thank you for joining us again. We appreciate you being on. And last thoughts.
Well, just remember that Donald Trump is not going to save us because, you know, the world is in such a moral decline state that we don't deserve the blessings of protection anymore. So the nation's going to go through the tribulation and through great difficulties, and so you need to be prepared. The biggest thing you need to prepare for is World War III that's coming. It may still be within Donald Trump's term, but it's probably going to be, you know, whenever China attacks Taiwan. That's what I believe is going to lead to World War III.
Well, Joel, my producer said, Joel, no one is coming to save us. Thank you, Joel. And that was his comment to right along what you were thinking. There's no one man that can save us. We need to do that ourselves as citizens, take care of ourselves. Joel, thank you for being one of those ones to share with us how to do that.
My pleasure. The Lord will always save a remnant, so be part of the remnant.
Thank you. And listen to the voice of conscience, folks, from Joel Skousen. So, folks, this has been Talk with John. Joel, thank you for joining us. And